Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
A major move by President Trump in what I call not just a war against the radical Islamic Republic of Iran, but against Islamic terrorism by taking out the lead terrorist for Iran. And what do I mean when I say that about Qasem Soleimani? Well, he was there. What he conducted was all of their outside, so external, basically terror activities, running Hezbollah in Lebanon, running this new Hezbollah group in Iraq, running the insurgency against U.S. troops in Iraq during the Iraq War. I mean, just between, check this stat out, and you think this guy deserved to die? Absolutely. In April 2019, the State Department announced that Iran was responsible for killing 608 U.S. troops during the Iraq War. Soleimani was the head of the Iranian and Iranian-backed forces carrying out those operations killing American troops. 608 U.S. troops he was directly responsible for killing. According to the State Department, 17% of all deaths of U.S. personnel in Iraq from 2003 to 2011 were orchestrated by Soleimani himself. He was taunting the U.S. now. He was leading this group that again, set fire to our embassy. And I put it this way. Unlike Benghazi, we're going to kill you just for burning some of our building. We're not going to lay back. You start burning some of our building, we'll kill you. And by the way, it wasn't just him that was killed. It was also the leader of that paramilitary group, that new Hezbollah group in Iraq that was killed. So we're not just gonna kill, the low-ranking guys. We're gonna kill the highest-ranking guys.
Soleimani was the hardliner of all hardliners. He was the most powerful Iranian general. He was a two-star general. Other Iranian generals outranked him, but he had more authority than they did because he was commander of the Quds forces, who report only to the supreme leader. And as I said during one of the breaks, I take exception to the fact that so much of the media is saying that we assassinated Soleimani. He was an Iranian general who was part of a terror organization. We are in a war on terror, and anytime you're in a war, another military officer, irrespective of his rank, is a legitimate military target. We took out a military target who represented an imminent threat to U.S. personnel and citizens abroad. I think it was justified. People say, well, what's the end state? Well, I don't know that there has to be an end state because we took action to kill someone who was about to kill more Americans.
So that has to make them wonder, who else do we have in their sights? Who else are we watching? See, there was a UN Security Council resolution that banned Soleimani from leaving Iran. The moment he was stepped off that plane in Baghdad, he was dead. So if anybody's questioning whether this was legal under international law, he was banned from traveling outside of Iran because of his terrorist activities, because of his links to clandestine operations, including kidnapping, torture, terrorist acts, and of course the murder of troops, all unjustified, creating the IEDs. So guess what President Trump did? The moment they knew Soleimani was going to arrive in Baghdad, he stepped off that plane, dead. That's not leading from behind anymore. That's leading from the front.
Iran still is a threat. And what this movie shows you is the nature and scope of that threat. And we've got to be really clear that Iran is both a regional and geopolitical threat. Not because just of their nuclear ambitions, but their desire to export terrorism around the globe. They view themselves as establishing the Islamic caliphate. That's what this is all about at the end of the day. And we have to be cognizant of that fact. That is what we're dealing with when we deal with Iran. This is a great special for you to understand the nature and scope of what our country faces, what our allies face.
We can create a modern international community that is respectful, that is secure, that is prosperous, that there are not tensions, inevitable tensions, between cultures, which I think is extraordinarily important. That's something that's very important to me.
He really wanted this to be a new beginning of the relationship between the United States and the Muslim world. He gave what has now become known as Obama's Cairo Initiative. Perhaps foremost, he wanted me to find a way to reach out to the Muslim world and engage much more with dominantly Muslim nations.
We do not consider ourselves a Christian nation or a Jewish nation or a Muslim nation. We consider ourselves a nation of citizens.
In Iran today, thousands of demonstrators in various locations kept up their public pressure on the Shah.
Khomeini is scheduled to return to Iran Friday after 15 years in exile. Today, the 78-year-old religious leader appeared to be in an uncompromising mood.
One of the chants today was bring back Khomeini, this man, presently living in Paris.
It was over 30 years ago that the revolution took place in Iran, led by a cleric named the Ayatollah Khomeini, who had actually been exiled out of Iran under the Shah of Iran's previous regime. Now, the Shah was put in place, and while there were a number of abuses under his regime, there was stability in the region, and radical Islamists did not have a foothold of control of a government. That changed in 1979. When the Ayatollah Khomeini came in and the Shah of Iran was removed from leadership, a major change and shift took place in the region. The region became radical, and it became radical in the context of Islam. And that has shaped not only Iran, but the Middle East, and even in the United States, even today. Now, what this movie is going to do is take a look at radical Islam's conquest, its mentality for control, and the various ways that it is engaging in infiltrating the West. Now, what we've seen so far, you've heard about jihad, lawfare, nuclear programs, and terrorism. But let's break it down. What is jihad? Jihad's the holy war. How do you engage in the holy war? You use the legal system as part of it. Sure, you use airplanes and turn them into bombs and run them into buildings. You use suicide bombers. You try to take over governments. But you also use the legal system, both domestic legal systems in the United States, but international legal systems as well, including the United Nations. And then, of course, there's nuclear programs. The danger of a nuclear threat is significant. It becomes part of the terrorist ploy, but is a ploy with tremendous consequences. The situation in Iran is not that much different than 32 years later as we look at the situation in Egypt. A lot of the issues that have developed over the last several months have revolved around the fact that what role would the Muslim Brotherhood have in a government in Egypt? And the short answer to that is any role for the Muslim Brotherhood starts looking an awful lot like Ayatollah Khomeini revisited. Now, I had the chance to sit down with someone who has been to the region in the Middle East many, many times. That is Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North.
Let me ask you first, your sense when you talk about radical Islam, how significant is the conflict with radical Islam and its impact it's having not only in the region, but around the globe?
Jay, it's existential for us. Radical Islam intends that all of us live under Sharia law. They are willing, and not just willing, but intend to die to make it happen. Of course, there's no greater honor than to kill an infidel in the process of getting killed yourself. And so if you look at what we've been up against, not really since 2001, actually going back to 1979, when the Ayatollah Khomeini goes back to Qom from Paris and begins to organize not the Iranian Revolution, but the Islamic Revolution.
Ayatollah Khomeini left Tehran and moved to Qom, which is Iran's holy city, where he lived until the Shah deported him 15 years ago, and may now wish he hadn't. He said as he went he would keep control of the country, as he put it, for the 1 or 2 years he has left to live.
Ayatollah Khomeini returned to the Shah's least favorite city, home, where religious opposition to the Shah began.
Everybody looked at it, and I confess to being part of the Reagan administration 1981 onwards. We looked at it as, look, it's just 10% of Islam. We don't have to worry about this.
Khomeini was forced to leave home 15 years ago after the Shah's troops killed hundreds of people in an unsuccessful purge of dissidents. But Khomeini indicated he will maintain control and direction of the government because he believes there should be no separation of church and state. And Khomeini said he does not want a democratic republic. He wants an Islamic republic.
It has become a global threat. It's a threat right here in the United States of America. And it's growing. It's growing in large part because we have a commander-in-chief, head of state, chief executive, who refuses to name the enemy. The enemy is radical Islam.
President of the United States goes to the University of Cairo. He says that in America, although there's a lot of Christians, we're not a Christian nation. We're not a Jewish nation. He says we're a nation of principles, which is a non-statement. Then you look at the fact, what you just said, that in 1948, our leadership, the government, and others in the world understood that there was this spiritual bond, if you will. Now we have this complete shift in relationship. You've got an Iranian threat that most of us believe is real, but you've been there more than most people. You know the people involved, you know the military, you've reviewed the documents, you've seen the evidence, you've been there firsthand. How serious is the Iranian Islamic threat to world stability?
It will change the world as we know it today if the Iranians, and I believe that they're headed in this direction, put on the end of one of those North Korean provided missiles anything that looks like a warhead. And the Iranians are building not only the warheads, they have the means of delivering it, and I'm telling you, target number one is Israel. The Israelis cannot abide that. It is truly an existential threat.
As a lawyer, I like to deal with evidence, and part of that evidence is to actually take you to the region where the conflict is developing. That is, as Oliver North just said, an existential threat in the Middle East, so we traveled to Israel. We had the opportunity to talk with members of the military, members of the government, some of the leading journalists in the area, to get a first-hand look at how the threat of radical Islam and Iran impacts Israel, the region, and the world. I had a chance to sit down with one of the most noted journalists in the Middle East, Renan Bergman, to get his impact and impressions as to what's happening in the region right now as it relates to Iran and possible war and conflict with Iran.
First, very basic and fundamental question. Is there a war going on with Iran right now?
This is the longest ongoing war in the Middle East. It has been taking place since Ayatollah Khomeini took over the Islamic Republic of Iran in the 1st of February 1979. It has been going on every day until this minute. Under the public's radar, nobody knows the full details of that. But from almost day one, the Islamic Republic of Iran tried to obtain nuclear weapon and tried to export the revolution to proxy jihadist movement in the Middle East, trying to imitate the geniuses in the revolution of Khomeini to other places. And at the same time, the secret services of the United States and Israel declared war on Iran, and this is the clandestine war between these two forces.
Iran was a free country. One has to remember, under the Shah, very advanced, very Western, very scientifically very impressive. It was taken over by this regime of fundamentalism, and really Black Night came over Iran. So definitely America stands and works for the values that Iran is against. But there's a special role for Israel here. Iran uses rhetoric that we haven't heard for decades. Eliminating Israel. Israel should not exist, has no right to exist. Israel, I quote, is a cancerous tumor that should be removed from the Middle East. It's said again and again. So when you see a country that says you are not legitimate, you will not exist in the end of the game here, and we go nuclear and involved in terror like no other country, to put it in an understatement, is a cause for concern.
Thanks to your support of the ACLJ, we have had many victories.
The IRS now formally apologizing to Tea Party groups.
If any group feels like they're being targeted, they can go to federal court and bring our case. That's a victory.
It's one of the most significant wins in the ACLJ's history, to take on the IRS and win.
For more than 27 years, the ACLJ has been fighting for freedom and liberty in the United States and around the globe.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this. They're fighting for life at a whole new level to beat back the abortion juggernaut. But I actually think we're winning this. This is one of the social issues we're winning.
The release of Andrew Brunson.
We're flying and they finally left Turkish airspace. It's like, okay, we're really out of Turkey and free again.
We need your help as we continue this work here in the United States and around the world. Join us online at the American Center for Law and Justice at aclj.org.
Iran still is a threat. And what this movie shows you is the nature and scope of that threat. And we've got to be really clear that Iran is both a regional and geopolitical threat. Not because just of their nuclear ambitions, but their desire to export terrorism around the globe. They view themselves as establishing the Islamic caliphate. That's what this is all about at the end of the day. And we have to be cognizant of that fact. That is what we're dealing with when we deal with Iran. This is a great special for you to understand the nature and scope of what our country faces, what our allies face.
But it's interesting in a way, you see, let me go one step deeper. The paradigm that we knew was the paradigm of nation states. Israel is a Jewish state, they are Arab states. Now you see a religious approach. They speak not in terms of political dialogue with Israel, what the borders should be, what this policy should be, but they speak of illegitimacy in the names of God. From Iran, from Hezbollah, and from Hamas, you hear that it's a religious commandment that Israel should not exist, that a non-Muslim state cannot be here. If this has the upper hand, this trend, it's going to be tougher. This layer of religious fanaticism on top of political debates makes debates almost without a resolution. Because, you know, gods never compromise. People do. Right. If you get it from God that you can't have an enemy alive, then what hope do we have? So I think it's the interest of really world order that this new trend of making everything religious commandment and the fanaticism that goes with it loses this fight.
Iran has become a major player in the region now, and there's a history to this that a lot of people do not know.
Well, if you come from the intelligence field where I come from, we always have to measure intent and capabilities. And regarding the intent of the Iranians, we just heard death to America, and we hear it from their leaders for many, many years. Regarding the capabilities, they're trying to develop atom bombs in order to rule the world. Now, going back to what David has been saying, the Iranians have been trying to take over the Middle East, get all the way up to the Mediterranean, just like they used to rule that region 2,500 years ago. And when you listen to the Iranians and you look at their actions, the Houthis are Shiites in Yemen that are shooting missiles at Riyadh's airports and are trying to take over Bab el-Mandeb straits in the sea in order to control the oil flow to the west. So when you look at Syria, when you look at Lebanon, when you look at what they're doing with Hamas in the south, you understand that they mean business when they speak about death to America, and they mean business when they speak about death to Israel.
Iranians have stated openly, simply, openly, that they want to destroy the state of Israel. Period. Exclamation point.
They speak of illegitimacy in the names of God. From Iran, from Hezbollah, and from Hamas, you hear that it's a religious commandment that Israel should not exist, that a non-Muslim state cannot be here. If this has the upper hand, this trend, it's going to be tougher. This layer of religious fanaticism on top of political debates makes debates almost without a resolution. Because, you know, gods never compromise. People do.
You're dealing with a regime headed up by a religious fanatic. The Ayatollah in Iran has a religious view that has no place for the state of Israel, fellow Muslims who disagree with him, and our country. He is a religious Nazi. On the day we voted on the Iran nuclear deal, he tweeted out, Allah willing, Israel won't exist in 25 years.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei posted incendiary comments about Israel. He flatly predicted that Israel won't be around 25 years from now.
And he warned that between now and then, Israel would have to worry about what he called the, quote, spirit of fighting heroism and jihad.
Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not. A comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
A bad deal is worse than no deal. We need to have a good deal here.
This deal will not stop Iran from getting a bomb. This deal will all but guarantee it.
The Iranian nuclear deal may actually be worse than we originally imagined.
I think the deal is absolutely horrible for us, but it's really, really bad for Israel.
And we're handing over hundreds of billions of dollars in sanctions relief.
Iran is going to have access to $150 billion in assets.
Israelis have been telling us, this kind of deal is giving Iran the legitimacy to enrich uranium.
Once Iran is able to perform a nuclear test, it would have a shield, a nuclear mushroom all over Iran that would deter the US and Israel from doing anything to retaliate against Iran or work against Iran when it supposed jihadist groups in the Middle East or worldwide.
If Iran gets nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia will, Egypt will, Turkey, perhaps others. So in 5 to 10 years, you could have a multipolar nuclear Middle East with half a dozen countries with nuclear weapons. That is a formula for insecurity.
Think of how arrogant Hezbollah will act, and Hamas, if Iran wins and it gets nuclear. So I think the stakes are very high.
If Iran gets the bomb, even if it doesn't use it, it would alter profoundly the history of the Middle East.
Iran's rulers promised to destroy my country, murder my people, and the response from this body, the response from nearly every one of the governments represented here has been absolutely nothing. Utter silence. Deafening silence.
Sanctions so far had tactical successes, but they did not reach the strategic goal. The strategic goal is to convince the Iranian regime that if they continue the project, the sanctions would cause demonstration in the street and the collapse of the regime. Sanctions must convince the Iranian regime to rethink the whole project over again and cancel it. If sanctions won't work, and so far they don't, Israel would take the decision, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, or for that sake, any other Israeli Prime Minister, would take the decision, launch the bombers, call for the strike over the Iranian nuclear sites, knowing that it would bear severe consequences, but still would not let Israeli and Jewish population be under threat of annihilation. The trauma of the Holocaust is so strong and is so inherent to the Israeli genome, to the Jewish genome, that no Israeli Prime Minister will let a hostile country that calls for the destruction of Israel have the capability to execute such an extinction.
Is your sense that the goal here of Iran is simply the desire to annihilate Israel? They talk about that openly. They say, we want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. But they really are looking much broader than that, aren't they? I mean, Israel is kind of in the way from the rest of the conquest.
Yeah, the main reason for trying to achieve a nuclear capability is to be able to cope with Israel and probably to destroy Israel. Because once they will have such a bomb, they will face a very, very huge temptation to use it. And I think that they might use it. I don't want to be like a rat in a lab waiting to see either the Iranians will use a bomb once they have it or they will not use it.
Nobody knows whether they would use it. Normally speaking, one assumes that if somebody is producing a weapon, they have the intention of using it. But in the nuclear field, it's different. The United States and the Soviet Union produced nuclear weapons for scores of years, but they never used them. And there was a mutual deterrent, as you know. So whether Iran would want to use the weapon, I do not know. I think they themselves do not know yet. But they certainly would like to have the option of having such a weapon, as I said, in order either to use it in certain circumstances or to use it as a threat to extort from countries in the region concessions which they would like these countries to make on the political field, on the strategic field, on the economic field, and on other fields.
I think that the Iranians have demonstrated a pragmatic and rational policy when the regime was under threat of annihilation. They know that Israel would strike them back with nuclear weapon. They know that Israel would put them back to the Stone Age. And from their point of view, their survival in the regime, in this rotten, corrupted regime, is the sole or the central reason. Therefore, I don't think that they would use it, only if they're back to the war. However, Israel and the United States should do whatever they can to prevent Iran from being nuclear, from getting the nuclear capability.
The United Nations is not going to stand up to radical Islam. The United States has to lead pro-Western democracies with that Judeo-Christian foundation to what those democracies are all about, and realize that's the future for all of us.